In today's video, we are going to explore one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many relationships in a fun and engaging way so that by the end of this tutorial, you'll be able to create and manage database relationships like a pro. So let's dive right in. Now first, let me pull up this little presentation here. I promise it is really short, where I'm going to show you the different types of relationships in a relational database and also what entities we're going to use in this little example. We've got one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, and the first example here is the one-to-one. So we've got a character entity, and one character can only have one single backpack and vice versa, right? So one character, only one backpack, and one backpack can only belong to one character. So this will be our one-to-one relationship, and the next one already is the one-to-many. And let's say we are in a universe like a game or a series, for instance, where a character can have many different weapons. So this would be our one-to-many relationship. So one character can have many weapons, but one weapon only belongs to one character. And with that, we can already move on to the many-to-many relationship. And this would look like that. For instance, we've got many characters, and these characters can belong to many different factions. All right, so many characters, many factions, and the factions can have many characters. That's already it. So now let's have a look at the code. So I created a simple .NET 7 web API project here, right, with the default implementations. And when we have a look, this is what we get. We've got Swagger with this example weather forecast controller. I think you know the drill here. And what we first have to do before we can actually do all the stuff with Entity Framework and all the relationships is, of course, install everything we need for Entity Framework 7. Now, if you know this already, check out the timestamps below in the video description, and then you can already move on and just skip this. But for everyone who needs to also install Entity Framework, the .NET EF tools, and so on for the migrations, then because we're going to use code first migrations, then please keep watching and maybe code along or click along with me, together with me. And one more tip. If you want to manage your database a little bit easier, then maybe you want to install SQL Server Management Studio. And of course, you want to install SQL Server, because this is what I like to use. To do that, you can simply Google for SQL Server, and then you find the SQL Server downloads. And there is this Express Edition. Where is it? There it is. So you can simply go to download now. I already have this one available on my machine. And then there's also the, again, SQL Server Management Studio. Again, you can simply Google for this thing, SQL Server Management Studio, download it. And great thing also is that there's the link, SQL Server Management Studio, you also get Azure Data Studio. So if you decide to move this database then to an Azure SQL database, then you can also use Azure Data Studio to manage this database. All right, that would be it for SQL Server, but now Entity Framework. So what do we have to do? First thing, NuGet packages. So right click your project, whatever your project is, and then go to Browse. And in here now, we first can already install Microsoft, there's it already, Entity Framework Core. If you start with the implementations, meaning creating a database context, maybe you already know this, then this might be suggested in the quick fix menu for you. So you can also do it in another way, but this is maybe the more straightforward way. So you just manage your NuGet packages and then install Microsoft Entity Framework Core. So install this thing. And when this is done, then additionally, we need a provider for SQL Server. As you can see here, you can also do this with SQLite or Cosmos, whatever you want to do or use. But in my opinion, SQL Server makes sense. It is free, so why not use it? See this here, SQL Server Database Provider for Entity Framework Core. So we install this thing. And then to be able to use code first migrations, we also need one more package, and this then would be the design package here, shared design time components for Entity Framework Core tools. And after that, we've got two options. We can actually use the tools package here. There it is, and as you can see here, it enables these commonly used commands like add migration, bundle migration, drop database, and so on. But typically what I do is I use the .NET EF core tools. Now, what's that? I'm assuming you've already got .NET 7 installed on your machine. So what you can do then is simply enter .NET tool install and then -- global and then .NET EF. And as you can see, in my case, it is already installed. So what I can do just for you guys, I uninstall it. Uninstall, could also use the command update. This would also work, but let me just uninstall this thing. And now I think I have a new version now available. So instead of uninstall, I use install. 705 is now there. Great that I'm recording this video. And with .NET EF, I can simply double check, and there you see it. Entity Framework Core .NET Command Line Tools 705 are installed. Great. So this is what we need. And the next thing now is to actually implement the data context, all right, so that we're able to access our database. So how's this done? We just right click our project, add a new folder, call this thing data, and in here we add a new item. And this thing now, let me just call this data context, and this derives from DbContext. And as you can see here already, this is part of Microsoft Entity Framework Core. New reference is added here automatically. And here now we need a new constructor, and this constructor gets also an argument of type DbContext options with our data context type. We call this thing options, and we're also using our base constructor here also with the options, and that would be that. And then we're for now done with the data context. But when we're adding some entities, some models, then we also need to add database sets, but this in a couple of minutes. The next thing now is the actual connection string for our database, right? So we can save this already. And here in the app settings JSON file, we can add a new section. For instance, call this connection strings. You see it's already suggested here. And then here we say, we just call this default connection. And now again, if you're doing this with me, the same way I do it, so I installed SQL Server Express on my local machine here just for development purposes, learning purposes, whatever you want to call it. So then the connection string should look like this. You say server is localhost / / and then SQL Express semicolon, and then the database equals, this is then the name of this database. Let me just give this a strange name like TLOU database. Maybe now you know what I'm talking about. If not, maybe we'll just have a look in the comments. Would be great if the community is telling everybody what I'm doing here. After that, trusted connection set to true. And now since .NET 7, we also, for development purposes, have to add one more thing, and that would be trust server certificate also equals true. Again, just for development purposes. For production, maybe you want to set this to false and then provide a real certificate, but this is something for another video maybe. So server is localhost SQL Express, database the TLOU a database, trusted connection is true, and trust server certificate also true. Awesome. And now the last thing regarding configurations is we go back to the program CS, and here we have to tell our API that we actually want to use this data context and also use the SQL Server database for that. So what we can do now is maybe up here, we say builder services, and then add DbContext. Here we need our data context type again. And now here, this again gets options. And regarding these options, we're telling this thing that we want to use SQL Server. All right. And SQL Server needs a connection string, or this configuration needs a connection string. And with that, we can just use our builder configuration that was already, maybe I can do this one more time so we see it suggested here. Configuration, a collection of configuration providers for the application to compose. This is useful for adding new configuration sources and providers. All right, so this is what we want to use. And with that, we actually can access now our connection string section. As you can see here, there's a function already built in for us. Thank you, .NET team. This is just shorthand for get section connection strings. So let's use this function here. And the name of our connection string is default connection. All right, so that should be it, I hope. We rebuild and apply the changes, and Visual Studio is really giving me a hard time sometimes regarding hard reload. So you will see me restarting the application manually. Okay, so config is done, and now finally the entities. First, let's create another folder, and we can call this models, entities, whatever you like. So let's call this models for this example. And the first one again would be the character. We will start with the one-to-one relationship. So now we also add the backpack. And now first let's have a look at the character. So this character first property should be an ID, and maybe the name was already suggested here. That's great. So let's also add a name. I don't care about the warnings for now, all these null warnings here. And here now, what we can also do is another property for our backpack. All right. So this means that this character has one backpack, and we can actually also add the ID for the backpack maybe. So backpack ID it is, and pretty similar will look the backpack. So here in the backpack now, we again add an ID, and regarding one more property, maybe a description. And now the other way around, we add the character ID, and then here also character. All right, that's it. So we have our character here and with an ID, a name, and then these properties here, and also the backpack with an ID, description, and then the character stuff. That's it. With that, we define our one-to-one relationship. Now let's use code first migrations to create a database with tables out of this. But first, what we have to do is add these two entities as database sets here to our data context. So the first thing now, first db set is of type character. All right, and we call this thing characters, and this then will be the name of the table that represents our characters. So usually you would just pluralize the name here of the entity. So character is then characters, and pretty much the same thing now for the backpack. So here now we've got our backpacks, and I hope that's it. Haven't tested this before, so let's see. This is kind of live. Now the very first thing we have to do is we make sure when we have a look where we are here, we're in the solutions folder. Now this won't work. We have to go to our actual project folder. So now the name here is Entity Framework 7 Relationships again. And when you have a look now, you see we are actually in the in the project folder. And now here we can start a migration. So when we have a look at the commands that are available, database, DbContext, and migrations, the first thing we want to do is .NET EF migrations, and then add, and then let's say initial create, because this is our very first migration. Is this spelled correctly? Initial, yeah, I think so. And when this is done and the build hopefully succeeds, maybe with some warnings, then we will see a migration file. But this takes way too long. Maybe I should stop the app first. So let's try this one more time. This looks better. Now that's a bummer, of course. We get an error message here. Dependent side could not be determined. Well, what you can do here, it suggests that we have to fix this with the onModel creating. There are different ways to fix this actually. OnModel creating would mean a bit more code. We could also use foreign key attribute actually in the character class here. So telling our API here in essence that the backpack ID is the foreign key. But what we can also do, if you don't need it, we can just remove the backpack ID, save everything, and try this one more time. And all of a sudden, now there's no problem anymore. So dependent side is now determined. All right, so let's have a look at the migrations file. There it is. New folder here, you see migrations, and then we've got this single file here. And now we've got two methods here, up and down. Maybe you already know this, but now regarding the relationships, we will see that when we now run this migration and update the database or create the database, then we get a table called characters with an ID and a name. The primary key here is then the ID, and then the dependent side here is the backpacks table or the backpack entity, because here now we see we've got a character ID. All right, so an ID, of course, as always for one entity, a description, and then also the character ID. And here we see the foreign key then, that the column character ID is the foreign key, and the principal table then is the characters table with the ID as the principal column. And on delete is set to referential action cascade, meaning that if the character will be removed, then the backpack will also be removed. All right, so that's that. And in the down case, so if we would roll back this whole migration, then we would just drop the backpacks and characters tables. I think this is clear. So now we can simply update everything with .NET EF database and then update. Don't get confused by the update command here. This just means that it will also create the database if it does not exist, as you can see here. Create database, TLOU database. All right, and now I would say let's have a look at SQL Server Management Studio. There we are. Let's have a look at the databases. You can ignore the time tracker database. This is from my .NET Web Academy here. But now our TLOU database. Let's have a look at the tables. Great. Backpacks. Awesome. Characters. Let's test this here real quick. So for instance, no, first the character. We just add one. So for instance, we call this character here Ellie. And now here we say this is, for instance, Ellie's backpack, and the character ID now is 1. So here we have this connection, right? So we've got, again, Ellie with ID 1, the backpack also with ID 1. And now if we try to add another backpack, so Ellie's second backpack, maybe, something like that. We try to add it one more time. It's telling us cannot insert duplicate key row in object, backpacks with unique key, and so on. Duplicate key value is 1. Statement has been terminated. Great. So you can really see only one backpack is possible here in this case. And when we now delete Ellie, yes, and refresh this, then the backpack is also gone. Awesome. One-to-one already works. All right. Now the next type of relationship would be the one-to-many, the most common one really. And this was again a character. Our character here can have a list of weapons. So first let's create our weapon entity, right click our models folder, and then weapon, like that. This thing again gets an ID. Then also again a name. And here now, again, the character can have a list of weapons, but one weapon only belongs to one character. So this means, similar to the backpack, we have a character ID and also a character here, like that. All right, so that would be the weapon. And now here in our character, we add the list of weapons. All right, that's it. Maybe we can, no, I just wanted to initialize an empty list here, but let's ignore that and simply add another database set here. It's not, just to mention that, it's not always necessary to add the DB set here. When you add relationships, then any framework will know what's going on and will add the corresponding tables. But with that, you do not have the option to give the proper name maybe to that table. So the weapons table would maybe just be called weapon. And I don't like that. So this is why I always, pretty much always, add the database sets here. So we've got everything ready here. Let's try to add another migration and call this one now weapons, or maybe character weapons relationship. All right, let's have a look at the migration. There it is. In the app method, now we create the weapons table, and again, similar to the backpack, ID, name, and the character ID. We've got a foreign key here, and that's it. Isn't it great? So now, and again, please note on delete, if a character gets deleted, then all the weapons are also gone. So again, .NET database update. All right, you can see new table will be created here. That's nice, right? Again, we have a look at SQL Server Management Studio, refresh the database, and now we should see our weapons table. All right, characters did not change at all. Here's now our weapons table. And then let's edit this. And again, add Ellie here. And now let's say, please note ID now is 2 because the first Ellie was deleted. You know, here say in the weapons table, maybe we've got a pistol, for instance. And we can now also add a shotgun with this ID here. So Ellie now has 2 weapons, a pistol and a shotgun. But if we remove Ellie again, nope, delete, Jesus. That's what I wanted to do. And have a look at the weapons table. Gone. Great. And now let's move on with the many-to-many relationship. So for that, again, I wanted to add factions, all right, or call it teams, clans, whatever it is. And here now, we add a new item for that called faction. And in here, again, we just add an ID. Again, also just a name. And here now we add a list of characters like that. All right, and with that now we know that factions can have several characters, and vice versa. In here we again add another list, but this time of course also of factions. Now let's also add the database set. Here in the data context for the faction, we now say factions, save everything, and hopefully the last migration, right? So in this scenario now, this would be character, factions, relationship. This is done, and now you will see something very, very interesting, because in the up method you will see the factions table. Nothing really interesting here, but also another new table, a junction table, so-called, the character faction table with a characters ID and a factions ID, meaning to enable or make a many-to-many relationship possible, you need a junction table where these ID mappings are found. Now, just a side note, before Entity Framework Core 5, so with Entity Framework Core 5 and after that version, so now with Entity Framework 7 anyways, before that version you had to create this junction entity by yourself or do some magic with the Fluent API, but now this is the past. You do not have to do this anymore, but maybe again, just as a side note, this is an interesting fact. But here now you see this table will be created for us. And you can see also with the primary key here, this is a composite primary key, so there can only be one record in the database table with the same characters ID and factions ID combination. All right. And with that, you can also see that this is a foreign key. The characters ID is a foreign key with the principal table characters column ID, and same thing for the factions. And now the delete actions here mean that this is in essence an OR. So if a character gets deleted or a faction is deleted, then this entry here in this junction table will also be deleted. All right, let's do this with, again, .NET database update. Again, we should now get the factions table and the junction table. There it is, character faction, and also the factions table. Let's go back here, refresh this thing, and now we see our factions added up to 100, and now also character faction. And now how would that work? Again, let's go to the characters table, and here now we again say we've got Ali, for instance, and also Joel. And for the factions, where is it? There it is. We can say we've got the Fireflies, for instance, and the Hunters. And now in here, let me just have a look at the IDs 3 and 4. All right, and 1 and 2. So now here for this junction table, we can say Ellie, for instance, belongs to the Fireflies, but also to the Hunters, and Joel, same thing. Doesn't have to be right, okay? But just for demonstration purposes here, you see that this works. And now again, when we delete Joel, for instance, delete this entry, then in the character factions, this is removed. And now, for instance, when we remove the Hunters, just double check, this is an entry here, 3 for Ellie and 2 for the Hunters. And now we just remove the Hunters. This entry is gone. And now again, same thing for the character, of course. This is not, I have to refresh this, of course. Now it's gone. And let me just delete this thing as well, because now we've got our relationships, but let's play around with that with code. So we will next now create a controller and just add some actions here we can do with all these relationships. All right, now for that, let me just create a general controller. Okay, so right click the controllers folder, API, then empty one like that, because I have not too much code generated here. And let me just call this the TLOU controller. this will be a fat controller. I know you shouldn't do it like that. You should use a repository probably and a service. I do this in my courses, so please bear with me here. I know that, but again, just for learning purposes and to save you lots of time. So the first thing we need in our TLOU controller is a constructor, and in this constructor we inject the data context. So we can also start with the data context, so private read only, and then data context, call this context. And now with the quick fix menu, we can generate our TLOU controller and inject this. And now the very first method I would like to add here is a method where we create a character with the backpack already. But since our entities are a bit complicated with all these relationships, we should probably use some DTOs here, some data transfer objects, right? So let me real quick add another folder here. Call this DT, yeah, why not DTOs maybe? And here now, let's first create a character, create a DTO, and also a backpack, create DTO, and I hope this will work. So this thing only gets a description, string description, and actually we could also make a record struct out of this. So public record struct backpack create DTO with only again the description like that, and similarly public record struct character create DTO with a name, and also the backpack create DTO with the backpack like that. Yeah, actually I started it earlier and was hoping I stopped it, but I don't know, Visual Studio at its best today. So we've got our DTOs, and now let's try to use them in our method here. So this would be a post method, HTTP post, to create a character with the backpack already. So public async task action result, yeah, action result, where we, yeah, maybe return a list of all characters already. Let's see how this will work. Create character, now with the DTO, create, no, character create DTO, character create DTO. This is our request. And in here now we say new character is a new character, and the name is now here the request name. We also create a backpack, so our backpack is a new backpack where we set the description to the request backpack description. And now here, actually just could have used one DTO for that and not two, but anyways, the character now is our new character. And here now we say new character backpack is this backpack, and now we just access our characters table here with context characters, say add new character, we save all our changes, have to do that, and then we return okay, status code 200, await context characters, And now this is a bit much for beginners. Maybe I also want to include the backpack. So nope, actually include, and then see for character backpack to list async. And there is a curly brace missing. Well, let's see. Okay, there it is. Let's just try this with Ellie and Ellie's backpack. Hit execute. Okay, possible cycle. Character, backpack, yeah. Let me just have a look. This is because of that BS here. So now backpack, and what we can do is actually just set this to JSON, ignore, save this again, restart the app. Where is it? There it is. Try this out. Yep. All right, nice. This worked. Okay, not much, but this works, and we've got 2 Ellies here. All right, great. Now maybe we can now do one more thing and add weapons. So for instance, here we add a new DTO, or maybe you can just copy this. So here for the backpack, now we've got let's say weapon create DTO, weapon create DTO, and the weapon has a name. And here now in our character create DTO, we also say actually a list of weapon create DTOs. Call this weapons. Maybe we can format this a little bit. Automatic formatting not working. All right, then we use it like that. Jesus, Visual Studio, come on. And now here we also say that quick look at the weapons looks similar to the backpack, right? So maybe we can just copy this and say weapons is requests weapons select, and then for each weapon we say new weapon where the name is also the not the request, the weapon name, and the character is now the new character, like that. So we've got this new list, and the new character weapons is now simply the weapons. And we have to set this to a list. So to lists, and now this should work. All right, and in here now I not only want to get the backpack, but actually also the weapons. All right, save that. And now here we could say something like this is now Joel with Joel's backpack, and this guy now has a pistol and also a shotgun. We hit execute. Of course, there is the cycle error again, because maybe I should have used the DDO here as well. Would make definitely sense. JSON ignore. And let's also add this here. restart one more time. Okay. Looks great. So now we've got double entries here. So maybe we can have a look in the database. Here are the characters, execute SQL. Maybe we can delete Ellie here. First one, and the first Joel. We see Ellie, we see Joel. This is already nice. We see the backpacks. Yep, that's nice. And we also see the weapons. Nice. So this works. And the last thing, the factions. So let's just do the same thing. In essence, it's really just exactly the same. We add a new DTO again for the factions. That would be a faction. Create DTO. With a name. And now here we also add the list of faction. Create DTOs. Factions. And then here, nope, in the controller, we do pretty much the same thing. Factions, and for every faction we say this is the name. Maybe here now set this to F here as well. But the character list is now actually a new list of characters. And here we already add our new character. This one. All right. I will also push this to GitHub, so don't worry about that. And here now we say factions is factions like that. Restart this. There we are. Let me again just remove one character, Joel, for instance. Ah, come on, delete this one. Okay. And you see it here now, we've got the factions as well. So here now we just say, instead of weapons, or additionally to the weapons, we also add factions, and this would be something like the fireflies and the hunters. What's the issue here? Okay, let's see if this works. Yeah, looks good. Okay, nice. And I'll double check in the database. We've got Joel now with ID 9. Same here. And here. And now in the factions table, we've got the two factions with ID 3 and 4. And now in character faction, we see the mapping here. Great. So this works as well. Of course, I know this is just creating, no updating or anything is done here. And actually we have to include the factions here as well. So maybe we can just add one more method, just a get method to get one specific character. So that'll be then HTTP get public async task action result character get character by ID. And let me also add the ID here as a route. Not necessary actually, but definitely a better practice. And here now we just say character is await context characters, and here now we want to include first the backpack, then we want to include the weapons, and now also the factions, and return this. Nope, not return. We want to get the first or default where the ID is the given ID, and here we just return this thing. And we want to call the async one. All right. That should be it. And let's have a look. Try this. And the IDs for the characters are actually, where are they? 5 and 9. So when we go to Ellie, we see weapons and factions are empty, but we got Ellie's backpack. That's nice. And 9 is Joel with his backpack, the pistol and the shotgun belonging to the Fireflies and the Hunters. Again, if that's correct, I leave this up to you. And that's pretty much it. All right, so I hope this was not too complicated, especially here in the end with the controller. Again, I just wanted to play around with that stuff, show you something. There was no script, nothing prepared really. So we can now create characters. One more tip, do this with DTOs, really. Create data transfer objects for transferring data to the server and or to the service, and then also to returning data back to the client. You see it here, this gave us some trouble. This is why we had to use the JSON ignore attribute. It's not the best practice really, so DTOs make a lot of sense here. But still, I hope you learned something. If so, I'd really appreciate it if you could give me a like and maybe even subscribe to my channel and just write a comment in the comment section below. Thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for watching. And I hope I see you next time. Take care.